The sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, as if it were careful not to disturb the quiet that lived in the fields. Soft gold light spilled across the rolling farmland, brushing the tops of the wheat and catching on the faded white paint of the Harris farmhouse. Morning in this town always came with a kind of tenderness, the sort that asks you to breathe a little slower, think a little deeper, and remember the things that used to matter. On the front porch, in a wooden rocking chair that had held years of stories, Samuel Harris sat alone. He was 74 now, though his eyes carried more weight than any number could measure. His hands, one steady enough to build barns, cradles, and the very chair he sat in, now trembled slightly as he rested them on his lap. He rocked gently, staring down the long gravel road as if it held answers he had been waiting for. Every morning, he watched that road. Every morning, he hoped it might finally bring someone back to him. The porch boards creaked lightly beneath him, the kind of sound that reminded him of footsteps from long ago, little feet, eager feet, running toward him, calling, "Daddy? Daddy!" That memory alone was enough to tighten his throat. Now, the only sound was a soft rustle of wind sweeping through the dying leaves. After a long moment, Samuel pushed himself up from the chair and stepped inside. The hallway felt too wide, too empty, too still. His boots made slow, echoing taps against the hardwood, a rhythm that reminded him of how quiet the house had truly become. In the kitchen, he reached for his worn-out coffee mug, the one with a crack along the handle from an old family camping trip. He poured coffee into it, black and steaming, and sat at the table. The chair across from him sat untouched, the cushion slightly indented from the last time someone had used it. That someone had been his daughter, Beth, during her brief visit 6 months ago. 6 months. Half a year. It felt like a lifetime. Samuel looked at the phone on the wall. Its cord hung like a drooping piece of rope, coiled and tired. He stared at it long enough to feel foolish, then whispered under his breath, "Maybe today." But the phone didn't ring. It hadn't in weeks. His children, Mark, Evelyn, and Beth, all lived hours away, caught up in the rush of modern life. At first, they called often, checking on him, telling him stories about work or the kids. But slowly, like a fading echo, the calls grew fewer. "We'll come by soon, Dad," they said. "Things are just busy right now." Busy, such a small word for such a big distance. He never complained. Not once. He loved them too much to hold their absence against them. But loneliness has a way of sitting in the chair beside you, eating breakfast with you, and following you from room to room. With a sigh, Samuel walked back to the porch. His bones protested, but he ignored them. The porch had become his window to the world, a place where he could feel connected to something, even if it was only the passing breeze. Across the road, Mrs. Patterson stood watering her marigolds. She wore a faded blue sweater and a warm smile that never quite masked the loneliness in her own eyes. She saw Samuel and lifted her hand. "Morning, Sam," she called out. "Morning," he answered with a nod, his voice soft. She looked him over with neighborly concern. "You expecting company today?" Samuel hesitated. He didn't want pity. He didn't want to sound desperate. So he gave the answer he always did. "Maybe, just keeping an eye on the road." She smiled gently, as if she understood far more than he said. "Well, I hope they come soon." "Yeah," he whispered. "Me too." When she turned away, Samuel's gaze drifted once more toward the horizon. The sky was a wide sweep of pale blue, and the road stretched into it like a promise that kept getting broken. He remembered when the house wasn't quiet, when there were birthday candles and noise and arguments and laughter, when Evelyn would sit on the porch steps and cry because her doll's arm broke, and he'd fix it with a little glue and a lot of patience, when Mark would run barefoot through the fields, coming home with grass stains and a grin as wide as the sky, when little Beth would fall asleep on his lap before he carried her inside. He remembered it all. Sometimes remembering hurt more than forgetting ever could. A small ache throbbed in his chest, not from illness, but from years of waiting for voices that had grown distant. He closed his eyes and breathed in the morning air, letting it fill the empty spaces inside him. What he didn't know was that something was on its way, a small disruption, a quiet shake to the life he'd become used to. something that would pull at an old memory he had locked away for years and begin a journey he never planned to take. For now, though, Samuel simply rocked in his chair, watching the road, listening to the wind, and holding on to a hope that was growing thinner each day. A father waiting to be remembered. A man sitting alone. Clouds hung low over Willow Creek the next afternoon, casting a gray stillness across the fields. The kind of weather that made a man think deeper than he intended to. Samuel stood near the mailbox at the end of the gravel road, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He checked the mailbox every day, partly out of habit, partly out of hope. Most days, it held nothing but grocery ads and bills he barely used anymore. But today, something unusual caught his eye. A plain white envelope lay inside, slightly bent at the corner. He reached for it slowly, almost cautiously, as if it might disappear if he grabbed it too quickly. The handwriting on the front stopped him cold. It wasn't from his children. It wasn't from any neighbor. It was written in script he hadn't seen in decades. He whispered the name aloud, barely trusting his own voice. James Whitmore. A name from a life he'd packed away long ago. A name heavy with memories and unfinished conversations. Samuel's heart tightened as he held the envelope. He hadn't heard from James in over 30 years. Not since their falling out. Not since the day they walked away from each other with anger that outlasted youth. With careful steps, he made his way back to the house and set the letter on the kitchen table. He sat down slowly, staring at it as if it were alive. The house felt different with the envelope sitting there, as if the walls leaned in, waiting to hear what was inside. For a long moment, Samuel didn't move. He simply breathed, steady and slow, letting the memories come back. He remembered long summers, boys running wild through the fields, him and James competing in everything. Fishing, racing, who could climb the barn ladder fastest. He remembered late-night talks under the porch roof, sharing dreams that grew bigger than the town they grew up in. He remembered the day everything changed, one harsh argument that split their friendship in two, and he remembered how neither of them ever tried to fix it. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it with both hands, smoothing it across the table as if it were something fragile. The letter read, "Sam, I'm not sure if this will even reach you, but I hope it does. I've been thinking of you a lot lately, more than I expected to. I guess time does that. It softens things, makes past mistakes look different. I'm not well these days, and the doctors say I've got to start making peace with things. You're one of those things, maybe the biggest one. If you're willing, I'd like to see you again, before time runs out on both of us. Your old friend, James." Samuel stared at the letter long after he finished reading. His eyes burned, though he wasn't sure if it was sadness, guilt, or the strange way life brings back the past just when you least expect it. He whispered to the empty room, "James, after all these years." He folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. Silence filled the kitchen again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Something stirred inside him, something old and strangely hopeful. He pushed back from the table and walked to the living room, eyes scanning the photos on the wall. Pictures of his children when they were small. Pictures of holidays and winters and birthdays that seemed far too warm for how cold they felt now. He wondered if they ever felt regret, if they ever looked back the way he did, if they ever missed him, or if he had just become a voicemail they meant to return later. But James had reached out. It occurred to Samuel that he hadn't felt needed, truly needed, in a long, long time. He walked back to the porch and sat heavily in his chair. The letter rested in his lap, the paper swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. Across the road, Mrs. Patterson was sweeping her porch. She noticed him holding something. "What you got there, Sam?" she asked gently. "A letter," he said, voice shaky. An old friend reaching out. Her broom stopped mid-sweep. "Well, that sounds important." "Feels like it," he admitted. "Feels like something I shouldn't ignore." She nodded. "Sometimes life gives us one more chance to make things right. Don't let it pass by." Samuel looked down at the letter again. His thoughts raced, memories, regrets, fears, and the quiet truth he didn't want to say aloud. "I don't know if I'm ready," he whispered. Mrs. Patterson smiled kindly. "Sam, No one's ever really ready. That's why we go anyway. He let her words settle deep inside him. For the first time in a long while, the road didn't look empty. It looked like a path leading somewhere. Maybe toward closure, maybe toward forgiveness, maybe toward something he didn't even have a name for. He closed his eyes and breathed in the cool afternoon air. This letter, this one simple envelope, had opened a door he'd kept locked for decades. And whether he felt ready or not, Samuel knew something had shifted. Something inside him had begun to wake. He held the letter close and whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time, maybe I should go." But he didn't move just yet. He simply sat there, an old man with an old letter, on the edge of a journey he never expected to take. Morning returned with a cool breath of wind, carrying the scent of wet soil and old memories. Dawn stretched across Willow Creek like a gentle hand, touching the tops of the trees and sliding across the porch where Samuel Harris stood, letter in his pocket, heart pounding slower and heavier than usual. He hadn't slept much, not after reading James' words again and again through the night. He'd sat at the kitchen table, the small lamp casting a warm pool of light over the faded wood, thinking about everything he and James had shared. Two boys growing into men, best friends who once believed their bond was unbreakable, until life, stubborn, messy, unforgiving life, had driven them apart. Now, after 30 years of silence, a letter had appeared asking for forgiveness, or maybe closure, or maybe just a final chance to sit together and remember when the world felt young. Samuel wasn't sure what he was chasing by going. All he knew was that something inside him wouldn't let him stay. He stood on the gravel driveway beside his old pickup truck, its blue paint chipped from years of sun and storms. The keys jingled in his hand. He ran a thumb along the silver metal, remembering how he used to take road trips with his kids in this very truck. Windows down, radio loud, their laughter filling the entire cabin. That laughter was gone now, replaced by a silence so sharp it sometimes felt like it could cut. Before opening the door, he looked back at the farmhouse, the porch, the faded curtains, the flowers Mrs. Patterson had helped him plant last spring, now starting to droop from lack of care. He wondered if his children ever thought about this place, if they ever wished they could come home again. He exhaled slowly and got into the truck. The engine groaned awake, shaking slightly like an old man stretching stiff bones. Samuel rested both hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield. "All right," he whispered, voice steadying itself. "Let's go see an old friend." The gravel crunched beneath the tires as he pulled onto the road, the same road he'd spent months watching in quiet hope. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't watching it. He was traveling it. Willow Creek slipped behind him as he drove past the wheat fields, past the rusted mailboxes, past the diner where he and James used to drink coffee after long days working on the farm. Every familiar landmark tugged at some old corner of his heart. The morning sunlight flickered through the trees, throwing patches of gold across the dashboard. A song came on the radio, one he hadn't heard in years. A soft country tune about time passing too quickly and love slipping through the cracks. It hit deeper than expected. He swallowed hard and let it play. Miles passed in silence. Not the sad silence of the house, but the thoughtful quiet that comes before a man faces something he's avoided for too long. His mind wandered to his children. Mark, the oldest, always determined, always in a hurry, always promising to visit next month. Evelyn, thoughtful, gentle, but overwhelmed by life, 3 kids, and a job that never let her rest. And Beth, his youngest, the one who called the most, until even she stopped. He wondered what they would think if they saw him driving alone to the countryside, chasing a friend he hadn't spoken to since they were young men. Would they laugh? Would they worry? Would they even notice? The thought stung more than he wanted to admit. As he drove deeper into the countryside, the land began to change. The hills rose higher, the trees grew denser, and the roads narrowed into winding lanes. These were roads he knew by heart, roads he and James used to race down on old bikes until their lungs burned from laughter. He slowed as he reached Whitmore's Mill Road, the sign leaning slightly to the left. His chest tightened at the sight of it. This was where he and James had their last argument. Standing in the gravel, shouting about work, stress, and pride. Two stubborn men who didn't know how to say, "I'm sorry," when it mattered most. He turned down the road. The house came into view, a weathered cabin with a tin roof, surrounded by tall pines and a wooden fence with missing planks. It looked older, sadder, smaller than he remembered. Samuel parked the truck and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Was James inside? Was he waiting? Was he even alive? The letter hadn't said how long he had, only that he wanted to see him before time runs out. Samuel stepped out of the truck. His boots sank into the soft dirt, and the cool air bit at his cheeks. He stood still, staring at the front door. 100 thoughts raced through his mind. Regrets, apologies, memories of laughter and anger and everything in between. He walked up the steps, each creaking board sounding like a reminder of the years he'd spent avoiding this moment. His hand hovered over the door. Before he could knock, the door opened just an inch. A woman stood there, gray hair pulled back, tired eyes soft with recognition. "Sam Harris?" she asked gently. He nodded, unsure what his voice would sound like if he tried to speak. She stepped aside. "Come in. James, he's been waiting for you." The words settled into him like a stone dropped into deep water. He took a breath, stepped across the threshold, and entered a room filled with the scent of old wood, medicine, and something he hadn't felt in years. Unfinished friendship. The journey had begun, not away from loneliness, but towards something that might finally heal it. The moment Samuel stepped into the cabin, the air felt different, thicker, almost sacred. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath his boots, echoing softly through the small living room. The smell of pine mixed with an undertone of medicine. A single lamp glowed in the corner, casting a warm amber light that softened the shadows. And there, in the recliner beside the window, lay James Whitmore. Samuel stopped in the doorway. The man before him was both familiar and unrecognizable. James' hair, once dark and wild with youth, was now thin and silver. His face looked older than his years, tired, sunken, carved with the marks of time and illness. One hand rested weakly on his chest, rising and falling with shallow breaths. He opened his eyes. For a moment, neither man spoke. Silence stretched between them like a long, fragile bridge. One step could break it. One word could save it. James exhaled with a raspy chuckle. "Sam Harris, I'll be damned. You actually came." Samuel's throat tightened. His voice came out soft, almost breaking. Yeah, I came." He took a slow step forward. James' wife, Mary, touched Samuel's arm gently. "I'll give you two some time," she whispered before slipping quietly down the hallway. Now it was just the two of them. Two old men, two old memories, two old regrets. Samuel pulled a wooden chair closer to the recliner and sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "James," he began, but his voice wavered. James closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself before opening them again. "You look older, Sam." Samuel let out a short, emotional laugh. "Speak for yourself." James smiled weakly, but even that small motion seemed to drain him. His hand trembled as he reached slightly toward the small table beside him, brushing against an old photograph. Samuel noticed a picture. Two teenage boys fishing at the creek, grinning with sunburned faces. He whispered, "You kept that?" James swallowed. "Course I did. You were my brother, even when I pretended you weren't." Samuel looked down, fighting the sting in his eyes. The hurt from years past hovered between them, waiting to be acknowledged. After a long moment, James spoke again, slow, deliberate. "I've had a lot of time to think lately. Too much time. Funny how you don't see your mistakes when you're young. Pride, stubbornness, you think they make you strong." He paused, breath catching painfully. "But all they really do is leave you alone." Samuel's chest tightened. He knew that feeling too well. James nodded toward him. "I heard about your kids. Well, I heard they don't visit much these days." Samuel looked down at the floor. "Yeah, life gets busy, I guess." James studied him, eyes softening. "That's what we used to say, too. Life gets busy. Funny how that becomes an excuse for everything." Samuel didn't respond. He couldn't. His voice wouldn't come. James continued, "I should have reached out sooner. I wanted to. Lord knows how many times I picked up a pen and then put it right back down. He coughed, wincing from the pain. I thought you hated me. I didn't, Samuel said quickly, shaking his head. I never hated you. I was just hurt and too stubborn to say anything. James gave a tired laugh. So we were both fools. Yeah, Samuel whispered, eyes burning. We were. Silence settled again, but it wasn't cold. It wasn't stiff. It was the silence of two men finally letting go of the weight they carried for far too long. James shifted slightly, grimacing. You know, I wrote that letter because I kept thinking, if I die without seeing you again, without saying I'm sorry. He broke off, voice cracking. I don't think I could rest. Samuel leaned forward, placing his hand gently over James' frail one. Hey, I'm here now. That's what matters. James' hand tightened around his. Sam, do you forgive me? James whispered, voice trembling. For walking away? For letting pride ruin something good? For not calling when I should have? For not being a friend you deserved? Samuel's eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I forgave you a long time ago, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to go back. James let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like relief. Thank God for that. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room. Dust motes floated gently in the warm light, swirling around the two men like quiet blessings. After a moment, James tried to laugh again, though it came out weak. You remember the summer we stole your dad's truck and drove it into the creek? Samuel chuckled through his tears. I remember you blaming me even though you were the one driving. That's debatable, James said, eyes twinkling faintly. They spent the next several minutes sharing memories. Old stories, forgotten moments, bits of youth that had been buried under bitterness and silence. With every laugh, every shared memory, a piece of the past seemed to fall back into place. But then James' smile faded, replaced by a pained, distant expression. Sam, there's something else. Samuel straightened, worry creeping in. What is it? James took a slow, shaky breath. I'm not sure how much time I've got left. Doctors say weeks, maybe. Samuel's heart buckled inside him, collapsing like an old barn in a storm. He felt something break open, grief for the years they'd lost, sorrow for the years they no longer had. James squeezed his hand weakly. I didn't call you just to say goodbye. I called because I didn't want us to end with anger. I didn't want you sitting alone someday, thinking you weren't loved. Samuel's voice cracked. You don't have to worry about that. Not anymore. James nodded, eyes softening. Good, that's good. As the daylight faded into a deep orange glow, Samuel realized something profound. This trip wasn't just about seeing James. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about reminding himself that relationships, friendships, family, love could still be repaired, even after years of silence. He wasn't too old to fix things. Not yet. Not completely. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The sun rose slowly that morning, brushing the old farmhouse with a pale golden glow. Dust floated lazily in the beams of light, as if the house itself was stretching awake after a long, restless night. Henry sat at the kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He hadn't slept, not even for a moment. His hands trembled as he held his coffee mug. But it wasn't from the cold. It was the weight of everything he had heard the night before, the truth, sharp as broken glass, slicing to the last fragile pieces of his heart. His children, the very people he spent his whole life providing for, the ones whose birthdays he never missed, whose school plays he clapped for, whose scraped knees he bandaged, and whose tears he soothed. They saw him as an obligation, a burden, a man to check on occasionally, if life wasn't too busy. He looked around the kitchen, slowly, as if every object in the room were reminding him of a memory. The worn wooden cabinets, the corner where Emma used to sit, kicking her feet against the chair legs while she waited for her pancakes. The refrigerator still covered with faded drawings, handprints, and crooked hearts with the words, "I love you, Daddy," scribbled in messy crayon. He whispered to himself, voice shaking, where did all that love go? The kettle whistled softly, breaking the stillness. Henry shut it off and leaned against the counter, trying to catch his breath. His chest felt tight, not from age, but from the ache of being forgotten while still alive. He walked slowly to the back door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The morning breeze brushed his face, carrying the smell of wet grass and distant pine trees. It was peaceful, so peaceful that it almost hurt. Peace, he thought, wasn't so comforting when you had no one to share it with. He sat on the porch swing, the old wood creaking beneath him. This swing once held 3 small children and 1 loving father. Summer evenings filled with laughter. Winter mornings filled with stories. Nights when they would sit together wrapped in blankets, watching fireflies drift across the yard like tiny floating stars. Henry closed his eyes. He could almost hear their voices. "Daddy, push me higher. Daddy, look at me. Daddy, stay, don't go inside yet." He opened his eyes again, and the yard was empty. Only silence remained. A long sigh left his chest. Deep, heavy, tired. A sigh of a man who had carried love like a full basket, only to find out that no one remembered the weight he bore. He whispered, "Maybe I didn't teach them right. Maybe I failed somewhere." The thought crushed him. It rolled through his mind like thunder, repeating itself again and again. It's a thought many parents fear, but rarely speak. Was it something he did, or something he didn't do? Had he been too gentle, too patient, too forgiving? Or maybe he had been too busy working, too focused on giving them everything he never had. Parents make sacrifices quietly. Children forget them loudly. Henry rested his hand on the railing of the porch and stared out at the road. The same road his children once raced down on bicycles. The same road he drove them to school on. The same road they drove away from when they grew up and built lives of their own. Now, that road only reminded him of distance. He closed his eyes against the Sting building behind them. He wasn't angry, not truly. Henry wasn't the kind of man who held anger in his heart. He was just tired. Tired of being patient. Tired of waiting. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Inside the house, the old clock ticked softly. Tick, tick, tick. Every sound felt like a reminder. Time doesn't pause. It doesn't wait for anyone. Henry wiped his face with the back of his hand. His voice came out small and worn. "I just wanted them to care the way I cared." He wasn't asking for much. Just a visit, a call, a moment, a little bit of the love he gave so freely. A chill ran through him as the morning wind picked up. He pulled his sweater tighter around himself, though it didn't stop the cold spreading inside his chest. After a moment, he stood and walked back inside. He moved slowly, feeling each step as if he were walking through memories. He paused at the photos on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, first days of school. His children smiling, his arms wrapped around them. A family that once felt unbreakable. He touched one framed photo gently, his fingers tracing the outline of Emma's little face. She had been such a bright child, full of laughter and dreams. And Jacob, strong and steady, always promising he would take care of his father someday. Promises, so easily spoken, so easily forgotten. Henry took a deep breath and lowered his hand. Something inside him had shifted. Quietly, like a leaf turning in the wind. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was just ready to stop pretending it didn't hurt. Ready to accept that love sometimes fades quietly, without warning. Ready to face the truth, even if it broke him a little. The house felt smaller now, quieter than ever. Too quiet. Henry sat down again at the table, folded his hands, and bowed his head. For the first time in many years, he prayed not for his children's success or safety or happiness. He prayed for strength, for the courage to keep going, for the peace to accept what was. And as the first tear finally fell, he whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I'm still here. Even if they forget, I'm still here." Henry sat in his truck for a long time before turning the key. The engine hummed to life, gentle and familiar. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, feeling the smooth grooves worn from years of use. Every scratch, every mark, held a story. In this seat, he had driven babies home from the hospital, taken his children to school, carried groceries, and made late-night trips for medicine when someone was sick. The truck had been a witness to a lifetime of love, a love he still held, even when no one came back to claim it. He inhaled slowly, letting the smell of old leather and dust settle inside his chest. Something inside him felt different today. Lighter, but in a painful way, like a knot finally loosening after years of tension. He wasn't driving to confront anyone. He wasn't going to demand love or apologies. He was going because he deserved answers. He deserved to speak his truth, whether they wanted to hear it or not. As he pulled onto the road, the evening sun washed the world in gold. The fields glowed like fire, stretching endlessly across the land. The sky looked like it had been brushed with soft pastels, orange, pink, and pale lavender blending into one another. Henry whispered to the empty cab, "It's time, old man. Time to stop hurting in silence." He drove the familiar route into town, past the gas station, past the little bakery Emma used to love, past the school his children once ran out of with backpacks bouncing behind them. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. He turned slowly onto Jacob Street. His son's home stood neat and modern, the opposite of Henry's weathered farmhouse. He parked at the curb and sat there for a moment, breathing deeply. Maybe Jacob wouldn't open the door. Maybe he would say he was busy. Maybe he would pretend everything was fine. But Henry had already prepared his heart for that possibility. He climbed out of the truck, walked up the driveway, and knocked. The door opened a few seconds later. Jacob looked surprised, maybe even uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his hair, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dad, I wasn't expecting you." Henry nodded gently. "I know. Can we talk for a moment?" Jacob hesitated, glancing back inside before stepping onto the porch. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, they stood there, father and son, two grown men with years of unspoken words hanging between them. Henry spoke first, his voice gentle but steady. "Jacob, I heard what you said the other night." Jacob froze. His eyes widened, guilt washing over his face. "Dad, Henry raised a hand. "Please, let me finish." Jacob nodded slowly. Henry's voice trembled, but he didn't look away. "I spent my whole life trying to give you and your sister everything I had. I worked long hours. I missed sleep. I tried to be there for every moment that mattered. I wasn't perfect, but I loved you with everything in me." Jacob swallowed hard. "When your mother passed," Henry continued, "I tried to hold our family together. But somewhere along the way, the distance grew. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe I didn't want to." He breathed deeply, gathering the courage he never imagined he would need to speak to his own child. "But hearing you say I'm a burden—" He paused, voice cracking. "It broke something in me, Jacob, not because I'm angry, but because I never thought I'd live long enough to feel forgotten by the people I love most." Jacob's shoulders slumped. His face softened with something like shame or realization. "Dad," he said quietly, "we never meant to—" "I know," Henry whispered, placing a hand on his son's arm. "I know life is busy. I know you have responsibilities. I know you have your own family now." He paused, eyes filling with warmth and sadness. "I'm not asking to be the center of your world. I'm just asking not to be left behind." Jacob's breath hitched as tears filled his eyes. His voice broke as he spoke. We've been selfish. Emma and we kept saying we'd visit next week or call tomorrow, but tomorrow kept moving further away. I didn't realize how much it was hurting you." Henry squeezed his son's arm gently. "I don't want guilt from you. I just want honesty. And maybe a little time. Time to sit together. Time to talk. Time to remember we're still a family." Jacob nodded slowly, tears spilling onto his cheeks. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father, something he hadn't done in years. Henry felt the embrace melt into him like warmth after a long winter. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jacob whispered. "I'm so sorry." Henry closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, the first real closeness in what felt like a lifetime. "It's all right," he murmured, voice trembling. "We can start again. It's never too late, son." They stayed like that for a long time. No words, no explanations, no excuses. Just a father and son finally breaking through years of silence. When they pulled apart, Jacob wiped his eyes. "Come inside, Dad. Please." Henry shook his head. "Not today. Let's not rush. But soon. And this time, let's mean it." Jacob nodded, understanding. As Henry walked back to his truck, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. A start, a beginning, a chance. He looked up at the sunset sky and whispered, "Maybe this is enough. Maybe this is the start of healing." And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. The next few days passed quietly, but not in the lonely way Henry had grown used to. The silence felt different now, lighter, almost expectant. He found himself pausing more often, listening to the small sound of the house. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rustle of the trees outside. Everything felt familiar. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't make him ache. He sat in his favorite chair near the window, watching the sky fade from pale blue to the deep calm of evening. The sun dipped slowly behind the fields, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. It was a view he had seen thousands of times, yet tonight it felt new. Maybe because something inside him had changed. Or maybe because something inside his children had changed. 2 days after speaking with Jacob, Henry heard a car pulling into the driveway. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his sweater out of habit. When he peeked through the curtains, his breath caught. It was Emma. He hadn't expected her, not so soon, maybe not at all. She stepped out of the car holding a small box of pastry from the bakery she used to love as a child. Her eyes were soft, her expression nervous but warm. Henry opened the door before she could knock. Emma froze, emotion rushing over her face. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. Henry felt something inside him loosen, like a knot gently untangling. "Hi, sweetheart. Come on in." She stepped inside, looking around the house as though she were seeing it for the first time in years. Her eyes lingered on the family photos, the familiar couch, the old rug she once spilled paint on when she was 6. "It hasn't changed much," she said with a small smile. "I kept it the way you kids liked it," Henry replied softly. Emma's smile faltered, her eyes filling slightly. "I'm sorry for not being around." Henry shook his head. "Let's not start with apologies. Just sit with me for a while." They settled into the living room, the glow of the fireplace warming the space between them. Emma opened the box of pastries and handed him one, his favorite cinnamon roll. He chuckled. "You remembered." "I remember more than you think, Dad." For a moment, neither spoke. They simply ate quietly, both aware of the years that had slipped away, the visits that never happened, the calls that were put off until tomorrow. Finally, Emma placed her pastry down and folded her hands in her lap. "Dad, Jacob told me what happened. He told me what you heard." Henry looked at the fire, watching it flicker softly. "It's all right, Emma. I know you didn't mean to hurt me." "But we did," she whispered. "We got so caught up in our lives that we forgot the man who made those lives possible." Her voice wavered. "You gave us everything. You worked yourself to the bone, so we could have chances you never had. And we repaid you by making you feel unwanted." Henry reached out, placing his hand over hers. "Life happens fast. I understand that. I don't blame you." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "But I blame me." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then forgive yourself. That's what matters now." Emma leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, the way she used to when thunder scared her at night. Henry closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her presence sink into him. It felt like home. It felt like everything he'd been missing. After a long moment, she whispered, "Can we start over?" Henry smiled, soft, fragile, hopeful. "We already have." They spent the next hour talking about small things. Her job, Jacob's family, memories from the past. Nothing forced. Nothing heavy. Just simple conversation. Real connection. And every second of it wrapped Henry's heart in the gentle warmth of belonging. As they spoke, another car rolled into the driveway. Henry glanced out the window. Jacob. He walked in without knocking, a plate of homemade dinner in his hands. "Thought maybe you hadn't eaten," he said, slightly out of breath. Henry laughed. "Now, this is a surprise." Jacob looked at his sister and smiled. "I figured Emma would be here." Emma raised a brow. "Really?" Jacob shrugged. "Well, I hope." Henry watched them with a quiet happiness he hadn't felt in decades. His children, together, laughing, teasing, talking. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. They ate dinner together at the small wooden table Henry built when the kids were young. The conversation was gentle, healing, honest. No one rushed. No one checked their phones. No one felt the need to leave early. It was simple. It was imperfect. It was everything Henry had ever wanted. As the night grew deeper, Jacob stood to leave. "Dad, how about we come back this weekend? Maybe have a little barbecue in the yard? Just like old times." Henry's eyes softened. "I like that." Emma hugged him tightly. "We won't disappear again. I promise." Henry held her for an extra moment, savoring the warmth, the closeness. When the door finally closed behind them, and their cars disappeared down the road, Henry stood alone in the quiet living room. But tonight, the quiet didn't hurt. Tonight, the quiet felt peaceful, like a soft blanket draped over tired shoulders. He walked to the porch, looked up at the stars scattered across the sky, and breathed deeply. Something inside him felt whole again. Not perfect, but whole. He whispered into the cool night air. Home isn't a place. It's the people who return. And with that realization, Henry stepped back inside, closed the door gently, and truly felt, that he was no longer alone. Sometimes the heart finds its way home long before the footsteps do.